Hello, everyone. My name is Sarianne Madsen, and I am the Ketogenic Dietitian at UCSF Benioff Children's Hospital in San Francisco. I'm here today to talk to you about the ketogenic diet in epilepsy management and the UCSF experience. So first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the ketogenic diet history. Since at least 500 BC, fasting and other dietary regimens have been used to treat epilepsy. In the Hippocratic collection, fasting was the only therapeutic measure against epilepsy recorded. 5 centuries later, fasting was documented in biblical times as a therapy for seizures. Mark relates the story of Jesus curing an epileptic boy in a quotation from the King James Version of the Bible. In the 1920s, the ketogenic diet was developed by Dr. Wilder at the Mayo Clinic as a treatment for epilepsy by mimicking the metabolism of fasting. For 2 decades, this diet therapy was widely used, but with the modern era of anti-epileptic drug treatment, its use dramatically declined. By the end of the 20th century, this therapy was available in only a small number of children's hospitals, and PubMed listed only 2 to 8 publications per year from 1970 to 2000. This all started to change in the 1980s when the diet received national attention on a Dateline special about Charlie, a 2-year-old boy with seizures who became seizure-free after starting the keto diet at Johns Hopkins. His famous father, Jim Abrams, then started the Charlie Foundation and directed a movie starring Meryl Streep called First Do No Harm. The Charlie Foundation has been instrumental in advancing knowledge and practice about diet therapies in seizures. And in the past two decades, there's been an explosion in the use and scientific interest in the ketogenic diet. We are now celebrating 100 years since the start of the defined ketogenic diet. So now let's talk about what is the ketogenic diet. So if you can look at the pie charts here. So the standard diet is 50% carbohydrates, 35% fat, and 15% protein, whereas the ketogenic diet is about 90% fat, 8% protein, and 2% carbohydrates. So it's a high fat, adequate protein for what each body needs, and a low carb diet to promote ketosis. So the idea is if you remove carbohydrates as the fuel source, the body will then use ketone bodies for energy instead. So if we were starving in the woods for weeks, this is how our body would adapt to burn energy. But we can't fast people or starve them for weeks and weeks and weeks. And so instead, we use fat for fuel, and then it does this fed mimicked starvation state, which promotes ketosis and is protective for seizures while still being fed and not fasting. So let's talk a little bit about some of the theories about how the ketogenic diet works. So no study has yet to clearly define how the ketogenic diet works, but the bottom line is that ketones enter the brain and become the primary fuel source instead of glucose. This causes neurochemical changes in the brain. So some of the theories behind why this works is the GABA systems. GABA is a major inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. On the keto diet, there's increased GABA synthesis. The presence of ketone bodies is also important. In neuron slices, the presence of ketone bodies prevented cell injury from oxidative stressors. Energy metabolism is also one of the keys. Ketone bodies may be a more efficient energy source versus glucose. The keto diet does cause upregulation of mitochondrial genes and genes involved in energy metabolism. Together, these may cause increased energy capacity and reserve and allow for the neurons to withstand metabolic changes, basically a neuroprotective effect. Low and steady glucose blood sugar levels can also be a key. So in the standard American diet, we eat carbohydrates and our blood sugars spike up, and then we have some insulin respond, so then that gets higher. And then that kind of brings your blood sugar down. And so we kind of are on this roller coaster all day after each meal on the standard American diet. Less strict forms of the ketogenic diet, such as the low glycemic index, has shown that despite not being in ketosis or having ketosis being the goal, simply focusing on keeping the blood sugar levels low and steady and not having blood sugar spikes post-meal can help seizures. So does it work? Yes, it absolutely does work. Studies have consistently shown that more than 50% of people who try the ketogenic diet have a 50% or greater reduction in seizures. About a third of epilepsy patients do not respond to drug interventions, making the diet a very powerful and useful tool to help reduce seizure frequency, duration, and strength. There are many studies showing these efficacy rates. I chose one that shows it nicely here with the bar graphs. So this is one study looking at a 10-year single center experience shown here where the black bar graph is the classic keto, the MCT oil is the white bar graph, and the modified Atkins is in gray. And this shows that combined, despite the diet form, 70% of the patients treated had a greater than 50% reduction in seizures. These numbers also translate to adults. In a 2018 paper looking at adult efficacy, out of 16 observational studies, which included 338 patients, it showed that 13% became seizure-free and 53% had a greater than 50% reduction of seizures. So time and time again, studies consistently show that there's usually about a seizure freedom rate of about 10 to 15%, and greater than 50% of people have a greater than 50% reduction of seizures. So now let's spend a little bit of time talking about the different diet versions. So you'll see all these terms around. There's the classic keto diet, which is usually talked about in terms of ratio 3-to-1 or 4-to-1. And you see that on the pie chart there, with most of the calories being from fat at about 90% fat. There's the modified Atkins diet, which was developed by Johns Hopkins in the early 2000s. And that one allows for more protein, so less of the calories are coming from fat, as you can see in the lower pie chart there. And the calorie levels are not typically defined. There's the MCT oil diet. So the MCT oil diet is focusing on getting most of your calories from a medium chain fat. So fats are strung together carbon pieces. So they come in different varying carbon chain lengths. So your smaller chains will be short chain fatty acids, which are typically found in your saturated fats, butter, cream, that kind of stuff. And then your medium chain fats, which coconut oil is rich in, those are very good at making ketones. So by using MCT oil as the main form of fat in your diet, it allows you to have more carbohydrates and still have a strong level of ketosis. There's the low glycemic index diet, which is a little more liberal in carbs, because the idea is that you are choosing all carbs that are not going to raise your blood sugar. So things with more fiber. So every carbohydrate that gets chosen on this diet needs to fall 50 or below from the index. And so that's the idea that ketosis is not necessarily the goal for this diet, but we're trying to keep the blood sugar levels very steady. And then you'll also hear a somewhat newer term that came about in the last several years called the modified ketogenic diet. And that's typically referring to still thinking in terms of ratios with the diet, but they're lower ratios. So a little more liberal, 1-to-1, 2-to-1. And then there's what I call the mix and match or sum of all, where you're kind of, taking parts of all of these things to kind of piece together what is the best fit for each individual patient or family. So let's dive a little deeper into what the classic and modified ketogenic diet is. So the classic diets were historically always started inpatient over 3 days, and all foods or formulas were weighed on a scale. So we have the Ketogenic Diet calculator, thanks to the Charlie Foundation, which has made calculating all of these meals and menus, very precise and much easier than the way it was first done, which was all by hand. And this is very helpful because we can then make sure that every single, meal and food is very specific and very accurate. So these are driven by the ratio. And so what that means is the grams of fat is the first number, and then the second number is grams of protein and carbohydrates combined. So the stricter the ratio, which is 4-to-1, means you're getting more fat from your calories and less protein and less carbohydrates from your calories. So you can see from these pictures here that at the 4-to-1, you have less broccoli, less chicken, and more of your calories coming from fat. So this is the diet of choice for anybody who's formula fed either through tubes or mostly by mouth, and then children that are younger. And then the lower ratio ones are now typically called the modified ketogenic diet. And these ones are, the classic diet is very good at providing a very steady macronutrient profile for each meal, because every single meal is calculated to provide a specific ratio so that you know that the food that you're getting will be the same for all meals. And we try to think of these diets or all ketogenic diet therapy as, we want steady blood glucose levels. We want steady ketosis levels. So we want the diets to be accurate and have all of the macronutrients, the protein, the carbs, and the fats be spread out over all of the meals equally to kind of produce these steady levels of blood sugar and ketosis in the blood. So the modified Atkins and low glycemic diet. So these are typically started at home, can be 7 to 10 days or as comfortable. If some people need more time to kind of do some research about what foods would be best, we can come up with meal plans, different things to make people feel comfortable. We typically, start to reduce carbohydrates down by about 25% at each step, and then go down every few days from there. People do this differently. Every diet center kind of does their own way of getting people onto these diets. I typically, do it by meal so that, we'll change over the diet to be keto, to be in the breakfast, and then a few days later we'll do the dinner, and that's kind of a nice gradual approach. Typically these diets, modified Atkins, we're focusing on the total carbohydrate grams and not necessarily all of the other macronutrient goals like the fat goals and the protein goals. And this is the diet of choice for, or either of these could be the diet of choice for people who eat and older children and teens. I do have to say though, in my experience with all of these diets, it is important in my mind to keep the ratio in mind when I'm developing these diets. I also like to set or give people calorie and protein and fat goals, because I have found that people generally tend to lean heavily on protein over fat after they've reduced the carbohydrates, which sometimes can make the diet not as effective. We all know that carbohydrates raise your blood sugar, but protein also can. It doesn't happen as fast, but if you eat too much of it, your blood sugar can kind of also rise, which drops your ketones, and then we're not getting that stable levels that we were talking about. So I chose this picture here because if you Google keto right now, you will see there's lots of delicious pictures, and a lot of them sometimes are not truly reflective of what the medical keto diet is. The medical keto diet usually has a lot more fat and doesn't have as heavy of protein. So just keep that in mind when you're looking up recipes or pictures for the diet. So let's talk about how you build a ketogenic diet. So a simplified keto diet is a good first approach. And it includes, we would find a protein source. So that could be eggs, meat, cheese, tofu, nuts, that kind of stuff. And then you get your carb source, which could be fruits or vegetables. And then you do your fat source. And the Charlie Foundation here has a nice pantry list of lots of different fatty foods and oils and fat sources. And it's good to keep in mind to vary your fat sources. You don't just want to have only saturated fat or only one type of fat. It'd be nice to vary these all just to make sure that the body is getting what it needs. And then, we're in kind of what I call a keto diet explosion right now. There are so many specialty food items, which is great news for the medical keto world. It allows people on this diet to eat all kinds of different new foods without having to spend all of the time making all of these things. And so that is, it's really wonderful that all of this stuff is available and can be found at many different local stores now. However, we do also have to keep in mind that, on a medical keto diet, we really want to make sure that all of our blood sugars stay steady and our ketosis stays steady. And so some of the way that these food manufacturers make these foods utilizing fibers or sugar alcohols or all these different things to get the net carbs to be low, that doesn't mean that every individual's blood sugar will not respond to some of these products. Some people might absorb some of these resistant starches or sugar alcohols to some extent, which then can affect your blood sugar levels. So we really have to be a detective and look and try and find and see what product is affecting the ketone levels if it is. So I always caution people to kind of go slow with these things, maybe start off with little amounts, check your levels, see if it has some effects. I've definitely had many cases where despite their carbohydrate total on paper seeming very low, their ketone levels were not reflective of what they should be. And so by doing some of this digging, we found that some of these food items they were taking in, even though it only said 1 or 2 grams of net carb, were actually affecting their blood sugar levels. And once we removed them, their ketone levels, became stronger and more consistent. So it's just important to keep that in mind when you're utilizing all of these wonderful new products. So now let's just talk a little bit about the UCSF program. So the Keto program was founded in 2010, and I started working with it in 2011. So I've been seeing keto diet patients there now for the last 10 years. We offer all versions of the diet, and we actually kind of specialize in working with individuals and families to find the best fit for success and for efficacy. So we often do what I call the mix and match approach, where we're taking little bits from each diet to best fit each family or patient. We really want to try and find what's going to work best for each situation. So once you're referred to start the ketogenic diet with us, we have an initial visit scheduled with the keto team, which is the nurse practitioner and myself, the dietitian. And that's when we kind of start the discussion about what is the best fit for the diet. We try to talk about how this will be a big lifestyle change. We assess readiness. We do a lot of education about what it will take to be on this diet. We discuss how it's important to kind of commit to being on this diet. Unlike keto that's not medical keto, we really need to make sure that we are committed so that we don't have cheat days. Because if everything is very steady and the diet is providing seizure control and you have carbohydrate, that can bring on seizures. And so we really want to try to, make that be known so that families understand what they're kind of getting into. And we say, you know, give it 90 days. And by that time, even though the onboarding can be difficult, it's a big change and we provide lots of support for this change. It's always kind of rough for the first few weeks to a month. And then once you kind of start to get used to it, things do get easier and people do get used to it. And then we can really test to see how the diet is controlling seizures. And we say give it 90 days because there is no one size fits all. Every patient we have is on their own unique version of this diet. And, you know, we really pride ourselves on trying to find that perfect diet and fine tune it. And so that takes some time to try and figure out what the best thing is for each person. And so we say give it 90 days just to kind of check out at that point how things are going. And then we can kind of decide, is the benefit of the diet worth it? So, you know, we then start to kind of discuss, should we bring you into the hospital? Should we start at home? And since the pandemic, we've actually started most of our patients at home, and it's gone really well. There's a gentler approach that I think people appreciate. There's less side effects because we're making smaller changes and taking more time. When we've brought patients into the hospital in the past, we saw much more low blood sugar levels, acidosis, nausea, constipation, and we see much less of these side effects when starting these diets at home. We still do bring patients into the hospital, usually if it's more urgent or if we have to, you know, start the diet faster for somebody. And so, you know, once again, we really tried to tailor each thing. And so if we decide it'll be a modified Atkins diet, we might then say, but here's your calorie goals and here's some protein goals and here's some fat goals. And then I keep in mind the overall ratio. And then we may start some MCT oil based on labs, or if we need stronger ketosis, or if your bowel movements, we need more, you know, it's always an ongoing kind of conversation and, you know, assessment to try and figure out where each patient and situation needs to be for the best efficacy. So I just listed some helpful resources. The Charlie Foundation is, you know, a wonderful resource with videos, tutorials, recipes, all kinds of stuff. I highly recommend that you check that out for tons of reputable information. There's the Ketogenic Diet Therapies book over there on the right, which is a must-have. It has tons of great information. The Matthew Friends website is kind of the UK version of the Charlie Foundation and has lots of information on there. The Keto Hope Foundation has this great program where they pair seasoned families with newer families to provide support for recipes, things like that. The Keto Cook is a nice website for, so it's a website and a book for reputable and more medical diet focused recipes. Some of these recipes that you find online may have too much protein or carbohydrates and may not have as much fat. So finding recipes from medical keto geared sites can really help, you know, you be able to use the recipe straight from there instead of needing to alter it to fit your numbers. And here's just another list of all of these different recipe idea websites. And again, you know, just making sure that anything you find on here, it's really good for inspiration, but you need to look at the total protein and carbs and fats that it provides and make sure that it fits within your meal plan. These are the references that I used for this talk, and I'd like to say thank you for listening and go keto.